The conference room on Station Unity was filled with worried faces from 40 different worlds. Commander Kelrick stood at the front, his blue skin darker than usual from stress. Behind him, a holographic display showed something that made everyone in the room feel sick with fear. A massive cluster of asteroids, each one the size of a mountain, was heading straight toward Verith Prime. The planet was home to 17 billion people, and the asteroids would hit in just 6 days. Kelrick's had been awake for 3 days straight, working with the best scientists in the galaxy. Every calculation showed the same terrible result. There was no way to stop it. The asteroids were too big, moving too fast, and there were too many of them. Evacuating 17 billion people was impossible. Even if they had enough ships, which they didn't, there wasn't enough time. "We have run the simulations 467 times, Kelrick said, his voice tired and heavy. Every result is the same. We cannot deflect the asteroids with our current technology. The energy required exceeds our combined fleet output by a factor of 3. A representative from the Thelian Empire spoke up. She was tall and covered in silver scales that caught the light. "What about using nuclear charges?" "We could detonate them in sequence," Kelrick shook his head. "We considered that. The calculations show it would only fragment the asteroids into smaller pieces. The debris field would still impact the planet. In some simulations, it makes the damage worse." Another voice came from across the room. This one belonged to a Vrexian, a species known for their engineering skills. "We could use gravity generators to alter the trajectory." "We would need 50 of our largest generators," Kelrick replied. "We only have 12 in this sector, and moving them into position would take 9 days. We have 6. The room fell into a heavy silence. Representatives looked at their data pads, hoping to find something everyone else had missed. But there was nothing to find. The Coalition had existed for thousands of years. They had technology that could move planets and create artificial stars. But this problem was different. It wasn't about having the right technology. It was about having enough time, enough energy, and enough resources all at once, and they didn't. A Carathian scientist stood up. His species was famous for their logical thinking. "Perhaps we should focus on evacuation. If we cannot save the planet, we can save some of the people." "We have run those numbers too," Kelrick said quietly. "At maximum capacity, we could evacuate 3 million people. That leaves 16,997,000,000 to die." Someone in the back of the room made a sound like a sob. The Verith delegates sat together, holding each other's hands. They had known this was coming. They had seen the reports. But hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way that numbers on a screen never could. The meeting continued for another hour, but it was just people repeating the same conclusions in different ways. There was no solution. They had to accept that sometimes, despite all their knowledge and technology, they couldn't save everyone. The best they could do was memorialize the loss and learn from it. The Verath would die. Their culture, their history, their families, all gone in a flash of fire and rock. That's when the doors to the conference room opened. Everyone turned to look. 2 humans walked in, and they looked like they had been running. The man was tall with dark hair and brown eyes, wearing a military uniform that had coffee stains on it. The woman next to him was shorter, with her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She carried a data pad and was reading it while she walked. "Sorry we're late," the man said. "Our transport got delayed. I'm Lieutenant Jake Martinez, and this is Dr. Lisa Brooks, Earth delegation." The room went quiet for a different reason now. Humans were new to the Galactic Coalition. They had only been members for 15 years. Their technology was primitive compared to most species. Their ships were slower, their weapons less powerful, their science less advanced. Most species saw them as enthusiastic children, eager to learn but not ready to contribute anything meaningful. Kelrick tried to be polite. "Lieutenant Martinez, Dr. Brooks, welcome. I'm afraid you've arrived at a difficult time. We are discussing a crisis situation." "Yeah, we got the briefing on the way here," Jake said. He pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. Lisa sat next to him, still reading her datapad. "Asteroids heading for Verith Prime, big ones. Moving fast, not enough time or energy to stop them with conventional methods." "That is correct," Kelrick said slowly. "We have concluded that there is no viable solution with current technology and time constraints." Jake looked up from the display Lisa had tilted toward him. He glanced around the room at all the worried, defeated faces. Then he leaned back in his chair and smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile or a sad smile. It was confident. "We've got this," Jake said. The room erupted, not with relief or hope, but with confusion and anger. The Thelian representative stood up so fast her chair fell over. "Excuse me? You've got this? Humanity has been in space for barely 2 centuries. You think you can solve a problem that 40 advanced civilizations cannot?" Lisa looked up from her datapad for the first time. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "Not solve it the way you've been trying to solve it, no. That's clearly not working. But solve it? Yeah, we can do that." A Vrexian engineer made a sound that his translator turned into laughter. "This is absurd. What makes you think human technology is superior to ours?" "It's not," Lisa said simply. "Your technology is way better than ours. But that's not really the problem here, is it?" Kelrix felt something strange. It was curiosity. These humans should have been intimidated. They should have apologized for being late and sat quietly while the adults discussed the real issues. But instead they acted like they had walked into a problem they could handle. "Please explain," Kelrix said, holding up a hand to quiet the other voices in the room. Jake stood up and walked to the holographic display. He studied the asteroids for a moment, then turned to face everyone. "You're all thinking about this like it's one big problem that needs one big solution. That's why you can't fix it. You need 3 times the energy you have, so you think you need to wait until you can get 3 times the energy. But what if you don't think of it as one problem?" Lisa joined him at the display. She started manipulating the hologram with quick, confident gestures. "Look, you've got one massive cluster, sure, but it's made up of individual asteroids. Different sizes, different compositions, different trajectories. What if we treat each one as its own problem?" "We considered that," the Carathian scientist said. "It would require hundreds of precisely coordinated actions. The logistics alone would be impossible to calculate in the time we have." "Right," Lisa said. "Impossible to calculate. So we won't calculate it all beforehand. We'll figure it out as we go." Now the confusion in the room was complete. The Carathian looked like Lisa had just suggested they try to breathe vacuum. "You cannot execute a plan without calculating the outcomes." Jake grinned. "Sure we can. We do it all the time. Look, we don't have all the answers right now. We don't know exactly how this is going to work. But we know it needs to work, so we're going to make it work." Kelrix studied the 2 humans carefully. They weren't joking. They weren't being arrogant. They genuinely believed what they were saying. It was fascinating and terrifying at the same time. "What exactly are you proposing?" Kelrix asked. Lisa pulled up a new display. "Give us access to your fleet data, your resource inventories, and your current positions. Give us 12 hours to put together a framework. We won't have a complete plan because we don't need one. We need a direction and the ability to adapt." "This is madness," someone said from the back of the room. Jake turned to look at whoever had spoken. "Maybe. But you've got 6 days until 17 billion people die, and you've already admitted you have no solution. So what have you got to lose by letting us try?" The room fell silent again. It was the silence of people who had already accepted defeat being offered a tiny, impossible hope. It was the silence of logical minds trying to process something that made no logical sense. Finally, Kelrix made a decision. "You have your 12 hours, but I will be observing your work personally. I want to understand how you think you can accomplish this." Jake nodded. "Fair enough. Come on, Lisa. We've got work to do." As the 2 humans left the conference room, the other delegates began talking all at once. Some thought it was a waste of time. Others thought it was insulting. A few thought maybe, just maybe, it was worth seeing what happened. Kelrix gathered his datapad and followed the humans. He had a feeling he was about to witness something that would change how the coalition thought about problem solving. He just hoped 17 billion lives weren't riding on his feeling being correct. Lisa set up her workspace in a small conference room that had been empty. Within 10 minutes, it looked like a disaster had hit it. Datapads were scattered across the table. Holographic displays floated in the air showing different angles of the asteroid cluster, and there were at least 6 empty coffee containers on the floor. Jake was on a video call with someone back on Earth, speaking quickly in that casual way humans had that always seemed too informal for serious military business. Commander Kelrix stood in the doorway and watched. He had observed many species working under pressure. Usually there was a clear hierarchy. A leader would give orders, subordinates would follow them, and everything would proceed in an organized fashion. This was not that. "Okay, so I'm looking at asteroid 7 Alpha, Lisa said to no one in particular. "It's mostly iron with some nickel. High density. If we hit it with a conventional charge, it'll barely move. What about using thermal expansion? Jake asked, still half focused on his call. Heat one side, it expands, creates thrust. Takes too long. We'd need to maintain heat for at least 18 hours to get meaningful trajectory change. Right. Scratch that idea. Kelrix cleared his throat. May I ask what your plan is? Lisa looked up like she had forgotten he was there. Oh, hi, yeah, sorry about the mess. We're still in the brainstorming phase. The brainstorming phase, Kelrix repeated slowly. You have 11 hours and 43 minutes remaining. Plenty of time, Jake said, ending his call. Okay, so I just talked to Captain Ryan Walsh. He commands the carrier Defiance. It's in this sector running training exercises. He can be here in 16 hours with a full crew. That's after the deadline I gave you, Kelrix pointed out. Yeah, but we don't need him for the plan. We need him for the execution. Jake pulled up a new hologram showing ship positions. Look, here's what we're thinking. The Coalition has all these resources spread out across the sector, right? Mining equipment, transport vessels, energy generators, research stations, all doing their own thing. Yes, Kelrix said. They are performing their assigned functions. Right. But what if they weren't? What if we pulled everything we could into one big coordinated effort? Kelrix felt his head hurt in the way it did when humans explain things. Those resources are assigned to critical operations. You cannot simply redirect them. Why not? Lisa asked, genuinely curious. Because there are protocols, procedures. Each resource is allocated based on careful planning and, yeah. But those plans were made before this crisis, Jake interrupted. So the plans change. Look, Commander, we need you to understand something about humans. We're really good at throwing out the rulebook when we need to. Over the next several hours, Kelrix watched the humans work. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. They would start down one path, hit a problem, and immediately switch to a completely different approach without any apparent distress about wasting time. They made decisions based on incomplete information. They used phrases like probably good enough and let's try it and see what happens. Lisa called in engineers from Earth. Within an hour, there were 6 more humans on video screens, all talking over each other in that chaotic way they had. Someone named Sophie Chen, who worked in asteroid mining, was arguing with someone named Kevin Torres, who was a physicist. They were arguing loudly, but no one seemed upset about it. You can't just strap a mining laser onto a missile and expect it to work, Sophie was saying. Why not? Kevin shot back. The targeting system is already there. We just need to modify the payload. Because the power requirements are completely different, you'll burn out the whole system. So we add a secondary power coupling. From where? You can't just magic up components, like we're not magicking them up. We're borrowing them from the sensor array. We don't need full sensors for this mission anyway. Kelrix listened to this exchange with growing alarm. You're going to dismantle critical ship systems to build untested equipment? Not dismantle, Sophie said from her screen. Repurpose. And yeah, it's untested, but we don't exactly have time to run a full testing cycle. We build it, we try it. If it breaks, we fix it. And if it breaks during the mission? Kelrix asked. Sophie shrugged. Then we fix it during the mission. This seemed insane to Kelrix. But he kept watching because he had given his word. And because part of him was fascinated by how confident they were despite having no guarantee of success. Jake was working on what he called the coordination framework. It wasn't really a plan in the traditional sense. It was more like a loose structure that could be adjusted as they went. He had divided the asteroid cluster into zones, and each zone would have a team responsible for it. The teams would have general objectives, but would be free to decide how to achieve those objectives based on what they found. This is too vague, Kelrix said, looking at Jake's framework. How will the teams know what to do? They'll figure it out, Jake said. That's what humans are good at. You give us a goal and some resources and we'll find a way. But what if they make the wrong decisions? Then they'll make different decisions. Look, Commander, I know this seems weird to you, but humans have been doing this kind of thing for thousands of years. Before we had computers and perfect information, we had to make do with what we had. That skill doesn't go away just because we have better technology now. Lisa called them over to her display. Okay, I think I've got something. Look at this. She had created a simulation, but it was rough and full of variables marked as unknown or estimated. Any Varith scientist would have dismissed it as too incomplete to be useful. But Lisa pointed at it with excitement. So we can't stop all the asteroids. We accept that. But we don't need to stop them. We need to deflect them enough that they miss the planet. Even a small change in trajectory, if we do it early enough, means they miss by thousands of kilometers. We know this, Kelrick said. The problem is generating enough force to create that deflection. Right, so we don't generate it all at once. Look. She zoomed in on one asteroid. This one is shaped weird. It's got this long extension here. What if we broke that off? The asteroid loses mass, which means less momentum, easier to deflect. And how do you break it off? Explosives placed at the weak points. We're not trying to destroy it. Just crack it in the right places. Kevin's voice came from one of the screens. I can make that work. Give me the composition data and I'll tell you where to place the charges. You can do that without detailed scans? Kelrick asked. I can get close enough. Won't be perfect, but perfect is the enemy of good enough. Kelrick sat down. His legs felt weak. These humans were proposing to solve one of the galaxy's biggest crises using methods that could be described as close enough and good enough. It violated everything. He had been taught about engineering and planning, but as he watched them work, he noticed something. They were moving fast, really fast. In the time it would take a Verith team to complete a preliminary assessment, the humans had already discarded 3 ideas, developed 2 more, and were building prototypes. Sophie was now working with a team on Earth to modify mining drones. They were taking equipment designed to slowly and carefully extract valuable minerals and turning them into something that could rapidly deploy explosives and provide thrust. The modifications were rough. They wouldn't last long, but they didn't need to last long. They just needed to work for a few hours. Jake got another call. It was from Ryan Walsh, the captain he had mentioned earlier. Ryan's face appeared on the screen. He was a man in his 40s with gray in his hair and a calm expression that suggested he had seen a lot in his career. Jake, I got your message. You're serious about this? Yeah. We need the Defiance as a mobile command center. Can you do it? Ryan looked at something off screen, probably talking to his crew. We can be there in 15 hours. I'm pulling in every favor I have to get there faster. But Jake, this plan you sent me, it's crazy, I know. There are at least 40 points where everything could go wrong. I know. We're going to be improvising. Most of this in real time. I know. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. All right, we're in. The crew is already prepping. We'll see you in 15 hours. After the call ended, Kelrick spoke up. He called your plan crazy. You agreed with him. Yet he's still coming. Yeah, Jake said. That's the thing about humans. We know when something is crazy. We just don't let that stop us. The 12 hours passed quickly. By the end of it, Lisa and Jake had created something that was part plan, part organized chaos, and part desperate hope. They had identified 73 asteroids that needed to be dealt with. They had outlined general approaches for each one. They had lined up resources from across the sector, much of it borrowed or repurposed from other projects. When they presented it to the Coalition Council, the reaction was mixed. Some delegates were impressed by the speed of the work. Others were horrified by how much of the plan relied on adaptation and improvisation. The Carathian scientist studied the framework carefully. There are too many unknown variables. This has less than a 30% chance of success. Lisa nodded. You're probably right. If we were doing this by your methods, it wouldn't work. But we're not. We're doing it our way. And what is your way? The scientist asked. Jake stood up. Our way is to start moving before we have all the answers. The Defiance arrived in the sector exactly 15 hours after Captain Ryan Walsh had made his promise. It was not the biggest ship in the Coalition fleet. Human vessels rarely were, but it had something that made it perfect for this mission: flexibility. The carrier had been designed to adapt to different situations, with modular bays that could be reconfigured quickly. Ryan stood on the bridge, looking at the view screen that showed the asteroid cluster. It was bigger than the images had suggested. Rocks the size of cities tumbling through space at speeds that would turn Verith Prime into a lifeless ball of fire. He had seen combat during the Outer Rim conflicts. He had flown through debris fields and navigated asteroid belts. But this was different. This was a countdown to apocalypse, and his crew was supposed to stop it. Captain, we're receiving docking requests from 47 vessels, his communications officer said. Mining ships, transport carriers, even a few science vessels. They're all responding to the human coordination call. Ryan nodded. Clear them for docking. Let's get everyone on the same page. Within hours, the Defiance became the center of a strange new fleet. Ships from a dozen species crowded around it, and their crews were confused about why they had been pulled from their normal duties. Some were angry, others were curious. All of them were about to learn how humans operated under pressure. Sophie Chen arrived on a mining transport called the Frontier. She brought with her a team of 20 engineers and enough equipment to build a small factory. When Ryan met her in the docking bay, she was already barking orders at her people. "Sophie Chen," Ryan asked. "That's me. You must be Captain Walsh. Where can I set up? I need space for assembly, testing, and modification. Also need direct access to your fabrication facilities. Bay 7 is yours. I'll have my people show you." "Great. We've got about 80 hours to build, test, and deploy 73 different solutions. Should be fun." Ryan watched her walk away, her team following like a small army. He had heard that humans had a reputation for being overly optimistic. Now he was seeing it firsthand. Kevin Torres arrived next, coming from a research station 3 systems away. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, which was probably accurate. He carried a data pad covered in equations that would have made most coalition scientists spend weeks analyzing. Kevin had written them during his 6-hour flight. "Captain Walsh?" "Kevin Torres. I'm here to make physics cry." "Excuse me?" "The physics of this situation say we can't win. So I'm going to find the loopholes in physics and exploit them until we do win." Kevin grinned. "It's going to be great." Commander Kelrix observed all of this from the Defiance's observation deck. He had expected chaos, but this was beyond what he had imagined. The humans didn't have a command structure in the traditional sense. Yes, Ryan was the captain, and yes, people followed orders. But there was a constant flow of suggestions, arguments, and impromptu meetings that would have paralyzed a Verith operation. A group of engineers was arguing loudly about the best way to modify a mining drone. No one was in charge of the argument. People just spoke up when they had ideas, and somehow, through all the noise, they reached a consensus. Then they immediately started building, even though the design wasn't finalized. "This is madness," muttered a Vrexian engineer who was observing with Kelrix. "Yes," Kelrix agreed. "But watch what happens next." The engineers finished building their prototype. It was ugly, with exposed wiring and components that didn't quite fit together properly. They took it to a testing bay, activated it, and it immediately sparked and shut down. The Vrexian made a gesture of despair. "See, failure." They wasted 3 hours. But the humans didn't look upset. They gathered around the broken prototype, talking excitedly. One of them pulled out a tool and started disconnecting a component. Another was already sketching a modification on a data pad. Within 20 minutes, they had identified the problem, designed a solution, and were building a second prototype. "They failed quickly," Kelrick said quietly, "and learned from it immediately." The second prototype worked. It wasn't perfect, but it did what it needed to do. The engineers celebrated briefly, then immediately started building 10 more, incorporating small improvements into each one. This pattern repeated itself across the entire operation. Teams would try something, fail, adjust, and try again. They didn't seem bothered by failure. In fact, they seemed to expect it. One human engineer, when a test failed spectacularly, just laughed and said, "Well, now we know what doesn't work." Sophie's main assembly area became the heart of the operation. She had teams working on different asteroid solutions simultaneously. One group was building explosive charges that could break apart rocky asteroids. Another was modifying mining lasers to vaporize ice and create thrust through the steam. A third was working on gravity generators that could be attached to smaller asteroids to push them off course. Jake and Lisa moved between teams, checking progress and making decisions. They didn't micromanage. Instead, they would listen to problems, ask a few questions, and then say things like, "Sounds good. Make it work." Or, "That won't work, try something else." They trusted their people to figure out the details. Ryan coordinated with the growing fleet of ships around the Defiance. Captains from other species kept calling, confused about their orders. "Captain Walsh, I was told to bring my mining lasers here, but I haven't received specific instructions," said one Thelian captain. "That's because we don't have specific instructions yet," Ryan replied calmly. "We'll assign you a target as we get closer. Right now, just be ready to move fast when we need you." "But what should I prepare for?" "Everything. Be ready for anything." This answer did not satisfy the Thelian captain, but he stopped asking questions. Kevin set up a command center that looked more like a physics experiment than a military operation. He had holographic displays showing real-time calculations, but half of them had warning messages about theoretical instability. When Kelrix asked about this, Kevin just shrugged. Yeah, I'm using some math that isn't technically proven, but it should work. Probably, like 70% sure. 70%? Kelrix felt his blood pressure rising. Maybe 75. The numbers are promising anyway. Despite his concerns, Kelrix couldn't help but be impressed by how fast everything was moving. A coalition operation of this size would have taken weeks of planning. The humans had gone from concept to active deployment in less than 40 hours. But then the first major problem hit. Sophie's team had built a device designed to attach to an asteroid and generate thrust using solar power. It was elegant, efficient, and when they tested it in a simulation, it worked perfectly. But when they tested it on a real asteroid fragment, it failed completely. The solar panels couldn't generate enough power in the actual conditions of space. Sophie stared at the failed test results. Her team gathered around her, looking worried. This device was supposed to handle 12 of the asteroids. Without it, the whole plan would need to be restructured. Kelrix waited to see what would happen. In a coalition operation, this would trigger a full review. Committees would be formed. Alternative approaches would be carefully analyzed. It would take days. Sophie looked at her team. Okay, solar's out. What else can generate power? Chemical batteries? Someone suggested too heavy. We'd need to carry too much mass. What about radioactive thermal generators? Takes too long to build. Okay, what if we don't attach it to the asteroid at all? This came from a younger engineer. What if we just push it remotely? Sophie turned to look at him. Keep talking. We put the thruster on a separate platform that follows the asteroid. It doesn't need to attach. It just stays close and keeps pushing. Sophie thought for about 10 seconds. That could work. We'd need better guidance systems, but yeah, that could work. Okay, people, new plan. We're building remote pushers instead of attached thrusters. I want a prototype in 4 hours. The team scattered, already working on the new design. The whole pivot took less than 5 minutes. Kelrix watched in amazement. A Verith scientist who was observing nearby spoke up. They just threw away hours of work and started over. How is that efficient? It's not efficient, Kelrix said, but it's fast. And right now, fast might matter more than efficient. The operation continued around the clock. Humans didn't seem to sleep much. They took short breaks, drank alarming amounts of coffee, and then went back to work. Some of them slept in their work areas, just lying down on the floor for an hour before getting back up. Ryan held briefing sessions every 6 hours. They were chaotic affairs where everyone shouted updates and problems at once. Somehow Ryan kept track of it all, making decisions in real time and adjusting the overall strategy. Zone 3 is running behind schedule, someone reported. Pull 2 teams from Zone 5 to help, Ryan said immediately. Zone 5 is ahead anyway. The gravity generators are using more power than expected. Reduce power to non-essential systems fleet-wide. Define essential as anything that keeps people alive and ships moving. We're going to need more explosive charges for the rocky asteroids. Sophie, can you build more? Give me materials in 8 hours. You've got materials in 6 hours. Make it work. Dunn Kelrix noticed that humans used a phrase constantly. Make it work. They didn't ask if something was possible. They just assumed it could be done in XPO. 48 hours before impact, the fleet moved into position. 73 ships and platforms, each one assigned to a specific asteroid or cluster of asteroids. Some were human vessels, but most were coalition ships whose crews had volunteered to follow the human plan. It was the strangest fleet anyone had ever seen. Built from mining ships, research vessels, cargo haulers, and a handful of military craft. Commander Kelrix watched from the observation deck of the Defiance as ships took their positions. Each one was broadcasting ready status, though he knew that half the equipment they were using had never been tested in actual conditions. The humans had built solutions based on theory and hope, and now they were about to find out if either was enough. On the bridge, Captain Ryan Walsh was coordinating final preparations. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that came from years of command experience, but Kelrix could see the tension in his shoulders. Everyone knew what was at stake. All teams, this is Defiance Actual. Status check. The responses came in one by one. Each team leader reported their readiness. though several added comments like, "As ready as we're going to be," or, "Let's hope this works." Sophie Chen was aboard the mining vessel Frontier, positioned near the largest cluster of rocky asteroids. She had 12 modified mining drones with her, each one carrying enough explosives to crack a small moon. The drones were crude, built in under 60 hours, and the control systems were glitchy. But they would fly, and they would deliver their payloads, and that was all that mattered. "Frontier ready," Sophie reported. "Drones are armed and awaiting launch command." Kevin Torres was aboard a science vessel called the Discovery, surrounded by computers running calculations in real time. His job was to coordinate the timing of all 73 operations. Everything had to happen in sequence, because changing one asteroid's trajectory could affect others. The math was incredibly complex, and Kevin was making most of it up as he went along. "Discovery ready," Kevin said, "running final calculations now. And by final, I mean I'm still tweaking them." "How long until you're done tweaking?" Ryan asked. "I'll let you know when the operation is over." Jake Martinez and Lisa Brooks were aboard the Defiance with Ryan. They had moved between ships for the past 2 days, helping teams solve problems and making last-minute adjustments. Now there was nothing left to do but watch and hope. "All teams stand by," Ryan said. "We begin operation in 60 seconds. Kelrix moved closer to the main view screen. He had never been religious, but he found himself hoping that whatever gods existed were paying attention. 17 billion lives depending on a plan that had been thrown together in less than a week. It was insane. It was beautiful. It was the most human thing he had ever seen. 30 seconds. On Vareth Prime, people were watching. The Coalition had broadcast the plan to the planet. Some people had evacuated to shelters deep underground, though everyone knew those wouldn't help much if this failed. Others stayed in their homes with their families, preferring to face the end together. Children asked their parents if the humans were really going to save them. Parents said yes, because what else could they say? 10 seconds. Kelrix noticed his hands were shaking. He pressed them against the railing to steady them. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All teams, execute. The operation began. Sophie launched her drones. They streaked away from the Frontier, heading toward their assigned asteroids. The control interface showed 12 green dots moving across the display, but one of them flickered. Sophie's hands moved across her console, trying to stabilize the signal. "Drone 7 has a guidance problem," she said into the comm. "It's drifting off course. Can you correct it?" Ryan asked. "Working on it. Come on, you piece of junk, fly straight." The drone's path wobbled but steadied. Sophie let out a breath. "Got it. Drone 7 is back on track." Across the operational zone, similar dramas played out. A mining laser overheated and had to be shut down for emergency cooling. A gravity generator lost power and had to switch to backup systems. A transport ship's engine started making a noise that definitely wasn't normal, but the captain decided to ignore it and pray. Kevin watched his screens as data poured in. Each successful action changed the calculations for every other action. He was constantly updating trajectories, adjusting timing, and sending new instructions to teams. "Team 12, delay your thrust by 40 seconds, he said. "Copy that, delaying thrust." "Team 7, increase power output by 8%. 8%? That's above our safety threshold." "I know. Can you do it?" A pause. Then, "Yeah, we can do it." Kelrix noticed that the humans never said no. They found ways to say yes, but it'll be hard. Or yes, but it's risky. They accepted challenges that would make other species refuse the assignment. The first asteroids began to change course. Small adjustments measured in fractions of degrees, but it was enough. Kevin's predictions showed them missing the planet by comfortable margins. Green indicators appeared on the master display, marking successful deflections. But the 5 big asteroids, the ones they had been most worried about, were still coming. Those were at the center of the cluster, and they couldn't be reached until the outer asteroids were dealt with. The humans had saved them for last because they needed to concentrate everything on them. "First phase complete," Ryan announced. "All teams, well done. Regroup for Phase 2. This is where it gets hard." Phase 2 required moving ships into position around the 5 big asteroids. These rocks were massive, each one capable of destroying a continent. The explosives that had worked on smaller asteroids wouldn't even scratch these ones. Instead, the plan was to use every available ship to push them off course through sustained thrust. It meant taking ships designed for cargo or mining or research and using them as oversized thrusters. It meant running engines at maximum power for hours. It meant overriding every safety system and hoping nothing exploded. Sophie's team attached thrust platforms to the largest asteroid. These were the remote pushers she had designed after the solar power failure. They weren't elegant, but they worked. The platforms activated, their engines firing at full power, pushing against the massive rock. Thrust platforms active, Sophie reported. Asteroid Beta is responding. Trajectory changing by 0.03 degrees per minute. Not fast enough, Kevin said, checking his calculations. At that rate, it still impacts the planet. I'm already at maximum power, Sophie said. I can't push any harder. This was the moment they had known was coming. The moment when their best efforts weren't enough. The moment when they had to decide whether to give up or to do something crazy. Ryan made the call. All ships, this is Defiance Actual. We're going to Protocol Red. I say again, Protocol Red, Protocol Red. It was the code they had agreed on. It meant shutting down life support to minimum levels. It meant pulling power from every non-essential system. It meant gambling that they could save Verith Prime before their own ships became uninhabitable. Captain, are you sure? His first officer asked quietly. Ryan looked at the view screen, at the planet below with its billions of people. Yes, do it. Across the fleet, crews began shutting down systems. The lights dimmed as power was rerouted to engines. Temperature controls were set to barely functional levels. Sensor arrays went dark. The Defiance's bridge became cold and dim, lit only by the glow of essential displays. Kelrix watched in horror. You're going to kill your own people to save mine. We're going to save both, Jake said firmly. We just need to be uncomfortable for a few hours. Sophie felt the temperature drop on the frontier. Her breath came out in visible clouds. Her team started shivering, but no one complained. They had signed up for this. Every person in the fleet had known what Protocol Red meant. The additional power made a difference. The thrust platforms pushed harder. The big asteroids began to move faster, their trajectories shifting. Green indicators started appearing on the master display, but then things started breaking. A mining ship's engine overheated. They managed to shut it down before it exploded, but it knocked that ship out of the operation. Kevin had to recalculate instantly, redistributing the load to other vessels. A thrust platform on asteroid Delta lost containment. The explosion was small, but it damaged 2 other platforms. Sophie had to reroute thrust from other asteroids to compensate. On the Discovery, Kevin's computer systems started failing from power fluctuations. He was running calculations on backup systems with half his displays dark. He worked by the light of emergency panels, his fingers flying across controls as he adjusted the plan in real time. Beta is off course, he announced. Delta is responding. Gamma needs more thrust. I've got nothing left to give, came a response from one of the teams. Then find something, Kevin said. Pull power from wherever you can. Sir, if I shut down more systems, I won't be able to maintain position. I'll drift, Kevin thought fast. Then drift. Just keep thrusting while you do it. I'll adjust for your movement. This was improvisation at its finest. Nothing was going according to plan. Because they had never really had a complete plan, they were making decisions second by second, adapting to each crisis as it happened. Kelrix had stopped taking notes. He just watched, unable to look away. The humans were doing the impossible not through superior technology or perfect planning, but through sheer stubborn determination to not give. The celebration on Verith Prime lasted for 3 days. 17 billion people had stared death in the face and lived to tell about it. Cities erupted in joy. Strangers hugged in the streets. Children who had been terrified now played games about brave humans saving the world. The entire planet had been united in fear, and now they were united in gratitude. But aboard the human fleet, the celebration was much quieter. They were too exhausted for anything loud. Captain Ryan Walsh sat in his quarters on the Defiance, drinking coffee that had finally been brewed at the right temperature, now that life support was fully restored. His hand still shook slightly, though whether from cold or adrenaline he wasn't sure. There was a knock on his door. Come in. Commander Kelrix entered. The Verith commander looked different than he had a week ago. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Understanding, maybe, or respect. Captain Walsh. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. Sit down. Want some coffee? It's terrible, but it's hot. Kelrick sat, declining the coffee. He had learned that human coffee was more stimulant than beverage. I wanted to speak with you before the official ceremonies begin. I need to understand something. Okay. Your plan should not have worked. By any mathematical analysis, by any logical assessment, you were operating below minimum viable parameters. You had insufficient energy, insufficient time, insufficient resources, yet you succeeded. How? Ryan took a long sip of his terrible coffee. You want the honest answer? Please. We didn't know we couldn't do it. I mean, we knew the numbers said we couldn't, but humans have this thing where we don't really believe something is impossible until we've tried everything we can think of, and then tried a few more things just to be sure. That is not a satisfying answer, Kelrick said, but not unkindly. Ryan smiled. Yeah, I know, but it's the truth. Look, Commander, the difference between us and most other species isn't that we're smarter or that we have better technology. It's that we're comfortable with uncertainty. We make plans, sure, but we expect those plans to fall apart. And when they do, we just make new plans on the spot. But that is so inefficient. Is it? We saved your planet in 6 days. How long would a traditional coalition operation have taken? Kelrick's was quiet. Ryan had a point. A coalition operation would still be in the planning phase. There's something else, Ryan continued. When we said we've got this, we weren't saying we had all the answers. We were making a commitment. We were saying that, regardless of what problems came up, we would figure them out. That's what we've got this means to humans. It's not confidence in our plan. It's confidence in our ability to adapt when the plan fails. Kelrick pulled out his datapad. He had been taking notes all week, documenting everything he observed about human behavior. May I share some observations? Sure. I noticed that your teams failed constantly. Equipment broke, calculations were wrong. Plans needed to be changed dozens of times. But no one seemed distressed by this. In fact, you celebrated failures as learning opportunities. That's right. Every failure taught us something. We failed fast, learned fast, and moved on. I also noticed that your command structure is very informal. People argue with their superiors. Subordinates make suggestions that change orders. There is no clear hierarchy at times. Yeah, that drives some of our coalition partners crazy. But it works for us. We figure the best ideas can come from anywhere, so we listen to everyone. Doesn't matter if you're a captain or a private. If you've got a good idea, speak up. This would cause chaos in a Varath operation. Probably. But it's not a Varath operation, it's a human operation. Different species work differently. Kelrick made more notes. One more thing. Your people willingly risked their lives. They disabled life support, pushed equipment past safe limits, and volunteered for extremely dangerous assignments. Why? Ryan set down his coffee. Because it mattered. Because there were 17 billion people who needed help. And we could provide it. That's reason enough for humans. We don't need to know someone personally to be willing to help them. We just need to know they need help. That is remarkable, is it? I think it's just being decent. There was another knock on the door. Jake Martinez and Lisa Brooks entered, both looking cleaner than they had in days, but still clearly exhausted. Hey, Captain, Commander, Jake said. Sorry to interrupt. The Coalition Council wants to meet with us. All of us? Ryan asked. The whole leadership team. You, me, Lisa, Sophie, and Kevin. They want to give us medals or something. Kelrick stood. It is more than medals. The Council wishes to understand your methods so they can be taught to others. You have fundamentally changed how the Coalition views problem-solving. An hour later, the human team stood in the Coalition Council chambers. The room was packed with representatives from dozens of species, all wanting to hear directly from the humans who had accomplished the impossible. Sophie Chen stood next to Kevin Torres, both of them uncomfortable with all the attention. They were engineers and scientists, not diplomats. They built things and solved problems. Speeches were not their strength. The Carathian scientist who had argued against the human plan rose to speak. I must admit that I was wrong. I said your plan had less than a 30% chance of success. I believed that following such a plan was foolish. I now understand that I was measuring success by the wrong metrics. What do you mean? Lisa asked. I measured success by the probability of your plan working as designed. But your plan was never meant to work as designed. Your plan was meant to be a starting point that would evolve through execution. This is a completely different approach to problem solving than anything in coalition doctrine. Kevin spoke up. It's not really that revolutionary. Humans have always worked this way. We used to call it learning by doing. You try something, see what happens, adjust, and try again. It's how humans explored our planet, built our civilizations, and eventually made it to space. But how do you manage the uncertainty? A Thelian representative asked. How do you function without knowing the outcome? We just do, Sophie said with a shrug. Look, I'm not going to pretend I wasn't scared out there. I was terrified half the time. But being scared doesn't mean you stop working. You accept that. You're scared. You accept that you might fail, and then you do your best anyway, Jake added. And here's the thing. We did fail. A lot. At least a dozen pieces of equipment broke. Multiple plans had to be scrapped and rebuilt. We were constantly behind schedule and under-resourced, but we never failed at the thing that mattered, which was saving Verith Prime. So failure is acceptable to humans? Someone asked. Failure of individual components is acceptable, Ryan said. Failure of the mission is not. That's the distinction. We're willing to lose battles as long as we win the war. The discussions continued for hours. The coalition representatives asked hundreds of questions, trying to understand not just what the humans had done, but how they thought. It became clear that this was about more than one rescue mission. This was about two different philosophies of action. The coalition's approach was to minimize risk through careful planning and proven methods. The human approach was to accept risk as inevitable and focus on adaptation. Neither was wrong, but they produced very different results in crisis situations. Commander Kelrick stood to address the council. I have observed the humans closely during this operation. I believe their success comes from several key factors. First, they are comfortable with incomplete information. They make decisions based on what they know and adjust as they learn more. Second, they value speed over perfection. They prefer a working solution now to a perfect solution later. Third, they empower individuals to make decisions without requiring constant approval from higher authority. Fourth, they treat failure as data rather than defeat. And finally, they possess a cultural trait that I can only describe as stubborn optimism. They believe problems can be solved, and this belief drives them to keep trying when others would give up. The Verith delegate stood, tears in her eyes. The humans saved our world, but I think they have given us something even more valuable. They have shown us that the impossible is often just the difficult in disguise. That with the right mindset, problems we thought were unsolvable become merely challenging. The Council voted to establish a new training program based on human methods. Ship's crews from across the coalition would learn human-style improvisation and adaptation. It wouldn't replace their existing procedures, but it would supplement them, giving coalition forces more flexibility in crisis situations. As the formal ceremonies ended, Jake found Kelrick standing alone on an observation deck looking out at Verith Prime. Beautiful planet, Jake said. Yes. It nearly wasn't. Kelrick turned to face him. I need to ask you something. When you first said we've got this, were you confident you could succeed? Jake was quiet for a moment. Honestly? No. I thought we had maybe a 50-50 shot, but I knew if we didn't try the odds were zero, so 50-50 seemed pretty good. You bet 17 billion lives on a coin flip. I bet 17 billion lives on human determination and creativity. That's better odds than a coin flip. Kelrick made a sound that might have been a laugh. I have completed my report on human behavior. Would you like to hear the conclusion? Sure.